Let's give him another round of applause. And Matt, thank you for being here. I love he's funny, isn't he? You're funny. So we are exploring Soul Trek this year. We are looking at and honoring the soul to boldly go where no soul has gone before. Last week we talked about the idea of how quickly things can change. How 50 years ago, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, the country was grieving and in shock. And then in February of the following year, the Beatles showed up and brought the British invasion. And it was this unexpected miracle. It was this unexpected fun that showed up that we weren't expecting. And so it feels like we're kind of in those similar times where we never know what's around the corner. We never know what good is going to show up. And we had that this week, didn't we, where they found the mammoth tusk in South Lake Union. I mean, really? What? It's like, what? A mammoth tusk, okay. I wonder what's under our building here. It's interesting. We'll find out. So today I want to focus on our toolkit for the trek. And there's two things I want to focus on today that we need for the trek. And one is a connection to God. And whatever and however you define God, whether it be a higher power or divine essence or spirit or the eternal one. So it's important that we have a connection with Spirit, with God. And then secondly, the second tool is to surrender, to have the ability to surrender to this presence of God, to surrender to this Spirit. Now, the truth is that whatever your definition of God is, or whatever your experience of God is, or Spirit, or the Eternal One, the truth is that whatever you know God to be is only a small portion of what God is, that God is undefinable, and it is more vast than we can comprehend. So when we say God is love, it's like what we grasp as love. What God is 100 times, 1,000 times beyond that. So God is more than we can imagine, and it cannot be defined. God is omnipresence, omnipotence, and omniscience. There is nowhere you can be where God is not. God is always present, no matter where you are or what's going on in your life. I think that in Psalm 139, verse 7, and up to verse 10, we read, "Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. And if I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast." The rest of that psalm goes on to say that, in my darkness you bring the light, that you knew me when I was in the womb and you helped to form my bones. And so this scripture is so beautiful because it says, where can we go? Where can we flee? Whether we're in heaven and we're happy and we're celebrating and everything's great, or whether we're in the pits of hell, in Sheol, and things aren't going so well and we're suffering, God is there as well. God is in all those places. So God is always with us on our trek. You've heard me tell this story before, but when I was 20 years old, I went on a trek to Africa. I went to 13 countries. I was gone 6 months. And I met a group in England, and then we drove from France, Spain, over to Morocco, through the Sahara Desert, where we had 13 flat tires, by the way. I remember my friends would say, "How could you go by yourself?" I wasn't really going by myself. I was meeting people even though I didn't know them. And they're like, "How can you do that? How can you go by yourself?" And for me, I said I wasn't going by myself, I was going with God. And that wasn't a platitude for me. It was an absolute truth that I was going on this journey with God, that God was my companion on this trek. And that experience proved to be true, that I feel like I surrendered fully on this journey and experienced the presence. Jesus, when he sent the disciples out 2 by 2, he said to them, take no sandals, he said, carry no purse, no bag, and no sandals. And then he sends them out. It's like, really? No. So imagine you're going on a trip, and you can't take your luggage, you can't take your wallet, and you can't even take your shoes. I mean, what is that about? And when I look at that scripture, what it says to me is that when we are in a place of releasing and letting go, when we're in a place that's like so different, it's like it turns our reality upside down, then the only one we can rely on is God. And so I think he sent the disciples out 2 by 2 because he didn't want them to get too comfortable. He wanted them to be willing to just rely totally on Spirit and to rely on God, and sent them out in that way. Although they were 2 by 2, they got to go with their friends or their loved ones. And I think that's why traveling is such a wonderful thing, because it takes our reality and it flips it upside down. So the rules that we're so used to following aren't the same rules when we're in another country, right? And so it allows that opening for Spirit to come in and allows that surrender. When the truck got to Rwanda, when the truck got to Rwanda, it tipped over in a ditch with everybody in it. Nobody was hurt. And what I knew was, because it was Africa, this is 1974, that it would take at least 2 weeks to get this truck out. And so we walked into town, a group of us walked into town, because some of a group was leaving and they were getting on a ferry going down Lake Victoria into Kenya. And I went to see them off, leaving the truck behind. And all I had with me was my passport, my journal, the clothes I was wearing, $5, and a camera. And when I saw the ferry, I thought, now I could either get on this ferry, as weird as that would be, or I could go back and live by the side of the road for the next 2 weeks. And so impulsively, as you would do when you're 20, I got on the ferry and I went into Kenya. And again, I had $5, my journal, the clothes I was wearing, and my camera. And I lived that way for about a month, because I knew eventually, at some point, the truck would show up in Nairobi with my stuff, and I'd be able to get it back. Ironically, I ended up getting my stuff back, and it was all stolen the next day, so that's funny. But one of the things that I experienced during this time was this incredible freedom of not having to worry about possessions, and not only not worrying about possessions, but being so in the flow with God and with Spirit and with surrender, because I had to, because I needed it to survive. I needed it to know where I was going to eat or where I was going to stay, or the people that I would meet. And I felt over and over again divine appointments showing up in my life, divine, just all these miraculous and wonderful things that were always happening. So part of the trek that we are on is a soul trek, and it's about inviting God or the higher power or the Spirit, whatever you want to call it, into our lives, and then surrendering to it. In the book of Samuel, chapter 14, we read, and I love this. This is so great. This is God talking. Do all that you have in mind. Go ahead. I am with you, heart and soul. Do all that you have in mind. Go ahead. I'm with you, heart and soul. So when we make our plans and our dreams and we step foot on that, it's like, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm with you. I am with you, heart and soul. The title of this talk is Make It So, because that is what Captain Picard always said after he gathered all his information and it was time for him to move forward and make a decision. He would say, make it so. Yeah? I think it's like amen, or so it is. I think we could say, and make it so, right? Make it so. So this is Black History Month, and I thought about, some of the luminaries of African American descent. And I think there's one person who gets overlooked because she's so influential and so in our lives, and that's Oprah Winfrey. I mean, really, you think about her story, it's amazing that she was born very poor, and she's one of the most richest people on the planet today. Her influence, she has influenced our culture. She has brought us a message that's inspiring, that's positive, that's bringing good into the world. And what's interesting to me is that in the early 80s, when she first had her show, Eric Butterworth was one of her people that she had on her show. And Eric Butterworth is a Unity author. He wrote Spiritual Economics. And she said that Spiritual Economics was one of the books that changed her life. It was one of those books that transformed her and set her on the spiritual path. And you know, when we look at Oprah's teachings, if you will, they're really unity. You know, they're very unity in their approach. It's about, you know, your mind and watching your thoughts, and about calling in the good in your life and focusing on that good. And she has brought that message into the mainstream world. Her first show, she was supposed to have Don Johnson on. He was very popular then. And he wouldn't come. And they were trying to bribe him with, like, they were going to give him rhinestone glasses and do all this stuff. And he's like, nah, and he didn't come. And so instead, they did a show about marriage and about how do you find the right person. And they included the audience. And, you know, I know Phil Donahue was doing that a little bit before then, but you know what I see her doing? What she did is she took the idea of the charismatic leader. She took the idea of the star, and she moved it so we could see each other. So she was looking at community rather than, you know, here is a star. Even though she interviewed a lot of stars, she also interviewed a number of normal people, ordinary people who had extraordinary experiences in their life. And I think that we're moving more and more in that direction, away from one charismatic leader to all of us. We look at Facebook and we look at YouTube and how many normal, everyday people are on that. And Facebook just did that thing with, you know, where they summed up your life for you since you joined Facebook. And, you know, my son did it. He was one of the first ones to do it. And I thought, oh, boy, you're a celebrity. Look at you. And I've enjoyed watching everyone's little tributes that they have on Facebook. And so, again, there's that move away from that one leader, that one charismatic leader, to all of us. When Oprah was in her 12th year of her show, she wanted to quit because she was exhausted. She said, I can't do this anymore. And during that period of time, she was filming a movie called Beloved, which was about slavery. And she said that as she was filming this movie, it hit her like it had never hit her before, the responsibility that she had to continue to be a voice and to have power and to have influence over the media. She said, Beloved is about an ex-slave. And during that process, I connected to what slavery meant, and my own personal ancestry and history connected in a way it never had before. And I realized that I had no right to quit from a history of people who had no voice, who had no power, and that I have been given this blessed opportunity to speak to people, to influence them in ways that can make a difference in their lives. So her own personal life was, she was done. She was exhausted, and yet she recognized that she could have a great influence on our culture, which she has done, is doing, continues to do. I think she lives her life by make it so. She also lives her life by surrendering and letting go and releasing. And the most powerful story she had shared is when she had read The Color Purple, the book, and she knew she was supposed to be in the movie. She absolutely knew it. She saw it, and she was a great manifester. She knew how to manifest things like crazy. And she said she went for a reading for The Color Purple, and nothing. Like a week goes by, 2 weeks goes by, a month goes by. Nobody calls her, and she's like, how could I have been so wrong? I was absolutely positive that I was supposed to be in this role. And she thought, you know what, maybe it's because I'm too fat. So she decided to go to a fat farm, and she's just feeling really down on herself, and she's running around the track, and she's, kind of crying, and she's singing, I surrender, and she just kept doing that as she's going around the track. Like, God, I don't know what your plan is for me, but I surrender. And as she's running the track, somebody comes out and says, you have a phone call. And she says, I don't want to take any calls right now. And they said, well, it's Steven Spielberg on the phone. And so she takes the call, and he says, you've got the part, but I'm telling you, if you lose 1 pound, you're not in. And so she surrendered. On this trek, we need companions. Just like Jesus sent people out 2 by 2, we need companions on this trek. We need community. And so we are going to start home groups again this year. And on March 15th, on Saturday, from 11 to 3, we're going to have like a whole church get together, retreat, potluck, and gather together, and then we're going to divide up into parts of town. So I encourage you to put that on your calendar and to come to that, because community and support are so important on our trek. I just want to touch in that, another part of the trek is there is suffering. I mean, if we're honoring African Black History Month this month, we can't do it without recognizing the suffering of the slaves. And Buddhism says that one of the 4 noble truths is that life is suffering, that eventually we're all going to get sick or we're all going to die or something. And I know it's not very unity, but, it is the reality in which we live. And I think that part of the trek is to be with each other and to witness, not to take away each other's suffering, because I don't know if we could do that. We can pray, of course, but to witness each other's suffering and pain, and to walk together and be together in that. And at the same time, in the celebration as well. So as we wrap up, we know that there is no place where we can go where God is not. God is your ever-present companion. Whether you are in heaven and celebrating and life is great, or whether you are in the pits of hell and you are suffering and you are in pain, God is in both places. God is that constant companion. God said, do all that you have in mind. Go ahead. I am with you, heart and soul. Make it so.